The night over Montana didn't just fall, it crashed. The wind screamed through Black Hollow Valley like a dying engine, bending pine and memory alike. Snow came sideways, erasing fences, tracks, even sound. In that white silence, only two lives breathed: Jack Harlan, ex-Army Ranger, and Shadow, the silver-eyed husky, who once dragged him from a burning convoy half a world away. The fire inside the cabin stuttered. The generator coughed. Somewhere beyond the storm, something tore open the sky. Not lightning, not meteor. A flaming wound, splitting the clouds in two, falling fast, hissing smoke like it was alive. Then came the shockwave. Windows rattled, walls shivered, and the clock on the shelf stopped dead at 12. Jack froze. Every nerve whispered incoming. His mind replayed Afghanistan in flashes of light and blood. But Shadow didn't freeze. He bolted to the door, howling with purpose, claws carving urgency into wood. Jack had learned one rule in war: trust your dog more than your fear. He geared up, stepped into the blizzard, the cold biting through layers like teeth. Each breath burned. Shadow led, nose down, tail rigid, moving toward Devil's Crown Ridge, where the sky still pulsed orange. Hours vanished into the white. Then Shadow stopped, ears flat, digging frantic. Beneath snow and twisted metal lay a shape, an aircraft darker than night, metal that reflected no light, fractured like glass. Jack smelled jet fuel, chemical burn, something metallic and raw. And beside it, a man, frost-paled, breathing shallow in a suit that didn't belong to any country. Jack knew. Jack dragged him out, barely alive. Then Shadow whined again, pawing deeper under the wreck. Jack brushed away ice and froze. It wasn't wreckage, it was something sealed metal, smooth as bone, humming faintly under his glove. Shadow growled once low, warning. Whatever fell from the sky wasn't finished falling, and before the storm ended, neither was the truth. Jack Harlan is 47-7, tall and lean, with a beard like frost on granite and eyes that have measured too many horizons. 5 winters ago he drove a rattling pickup above the last mailbox, left the pavement, and kept climbing until the map forgot him. He hut lodgepoles, squared timbers, raised walls alone, and screwed down a tin roof that chatters under sleet. The cabin stands where Black Hollow Valley narrows and wind funnels like water through a nozzle, a sturdy box braced to the hill. Morning is ritual because ritual keeps silence from growing teeth. Coffee boils on a propane ring until it turns black. The stovepipe ticks as creosote warms. He presses a thumb to the window. The frost prints a star where skin meets glass. He walks the creek line on snowshoes, checking snares he sets only to keep a rhythm he understands. He splits round chords and chords and chords and chords, tightens ropes on the antenna mast. Work is a prayer nobody hears, and the answer is the burn of the stove. Shadow moves first, always. The husky lifts his head from the braided rug, silver coat ruffling like quicksilver. Eyes like moonlight on steel register the seam of wind under the door and the hiss of snow on tin. He leans a cold nose into Jack's palm, holding it until breath steadies. Shadow is not merely metronome, compass and quiet sentinel. Jack trusts him the way a diver trusts a lifeline coiling back toward air. Down valley, fences vanish under drifts, tid drifts, lane road rhoda, 2-lane threads, frost ridge to the outside. The town keeps 312 names when weather permits a count. Winter steals some to basements and barns, returns them in thaw. The diner serves coffee that tastes like stories. The store stocks batteries that spark at 20 below. A church bell hangs crooked and needs a mallet on cold Sundays. When the pass closes, the plow driver sighs and stows the radio. People here give space as kindness. Lena runs a clinic that used to be shop with shopper shop, wall white and daz white and Tron white. A space heater coughing before it purrs. She sets bones, cleans cuts, a thin vaccine beside blueberry ice pops for trembling ranch kids and loggers. Rourke, once sheriff, now caretaker of everything with a padlock, watches the impound and listens to radio chatter from a desk. No one dusts. Rules make sense to him because they keep grief organized into drawers. Jack buys flour, propane, nails, and dog food when weather allows. Conversation ends before anyone asks how he sleeps. He drives uphill while daylight is still a pale rind and the road is a suggestion. The cabin receives him like a coat that fits. He stacks wood by the stove, checks the generator's choke, and stands still while the wind reasons out its next move in the crowns of fur. An old wall clock made from a pine round keeps stubborn time, a hairline crack splitting the numbers like a healed scar. On mild nights he lets the second hand click. On rough ones he drapes a towel and invents his own measure to prevent surprise. Sleep brings radio ghosts stitched from call signs and coordinates, static shapes into banter, then orders, then silent. He wakes tasting copper, smelling cordite that isn't there, and counts to 5 with a hand flat over his heart. 3 days of blizzard turn the valley into a monochrome ocean. The generator coughs, steadies, and begs for a firm palm on the casing. Power from the coop jerks like jar and a thin line bulbs hiccup. The FM band mumbles and folds. The satellite dish grows a white helmet and vanishes. Jack ties a rope from porch post to rail and leans into the gale to sweep it, feeling edges disappear where drifts overhang like balconies. Ice webs along eaves and frames flower inward. Inventory calms: canned beans, powdered milk, oats, rice, venison wrapped in brown paper, coffee in 2 tins, a caduceus jar, and in a jar antibiotics from a friend who once wore caduceus on a sleeve. Tools clean and oiled, 2 rifles with bolts removed, oiled rags folded beneath. He can strip in the dark yet refuses to chamber without cause. A scorched leather collar hangs by the door from a life almost lost and saved. Storm time stretches. He whittles a handle for a drawknife he may never need, sands until the grain rises, and rubs oil into wood until scent replaces thought. He teaches Shadow a new hand sign for weight, 2 fingers, and a tilt of the chin. The dog learns in 1 try. Between chores Jack reads field notes by someone who believed procedure could outpace panic and sometimes wins. By late afternoon the gale spends itself to a sullen moan. The trees stop shedding. Sound returns for a minute. A creek strains under ice. A raven argues with its echo. A cornice complains where the slope contemplates movement. Jack steps outside and hears the valley breathe. He and Shadow break trail to the shed, haul split rounds, sweep boot prints smooth, and study the sky. Inside he opens the first aid kit, counts dressings, clicks a penlight, checks tape, and replaces what feels short. He is not waiting for trouble, only refusing to be surprised by a solvable problem. He writes a morning list on a feed sack: scrap, rake roof, sweep chimney, brace mast, check west sash, and patch draft by hinge. He chews a vitamin as if it were a promise. Night pulls a hood over ridge and road. The stove glows orange, heat pooling lower. Shadow curls, paws twitching through a chase only dogs remember. Jack sits with his back to the door and watches breath paint and fade on glass. He could call the diner if the line held, but kindness sometimes scrapes raw places. He brushes Shadow's coat with long strokes that flatten work. The clock settles into a small, manageable sound. The town beds down in weathered ways. Lena checks the clinic generator, writes back soon on a counter note, and drives the corridors the plow carved at noon. Rourke locks the impound and stands outside with snow bearding his hat brim, listening to a frequency inside the storm. Windows glow, dim, flare, and finally rest. Another hour slides by and the storm returns, sharper, insisting the world shrink to essentials: heat, shelter, breath, heartbeat, and dog. Jack's mind wants to launch drills. Fatigue tangles syllables. The metronome he invented tries to outrun lungs. Shadow rises without sound and sets his chin on Jack's knee. The weight is firm and absolute. Breathe, hold, release. Again. He follows the cadence until thought unclenches and the room enlarges around them like a patient lung filling to capacity. Somewhere beyond the ridge a new sound threads the night, too straight for thunder, too smooth for falling rock. Not an avalanche, not any aircraft, Jack knows. It begins as pressure that lifts the fur along Shadow's spine and turns pupils black coin wide. The dog looks at the door, then at Jack, then back again. The clock ticks once, loud as a dropped nail. The generator stutters. The valley holds breath as if waiting for a verdict. Then the sky rips, and everything changes. Holds. Dawn thins behind the ragged crown of Devil's Crown. A seam of steel light, prying at black cloud. Wind scrapes spindrift into razors. Jack Harlan buckles snowshoes, shoulders a rope coil, and checks carabiners by touch. Shadow steps ahead, silver coat rippling, eyes bright as ice. They climb without talk, following the scar where the night split open. The draw steepens. Spruce trunks rise like pillars, their boughs humped with drift. Cornices overhang gullies, white lips that could break with one hard vibration. Jack plants poles softly, keeps weight moving, and matches Shadow's tempo to stay balanced on the shifting skin of the mountain. He reads the slope like a map of old wounds. Wind slab here, facets there, a thin bridge of crust laid over sugar snow. The cold bites through wool and will, trimming thought to functions he trusts. A smell cuts the air, acrid, synthetic, bright with danger. Chemical burn rides the breeze, wrong in a world of pine and frost. Shadow stops with one paw lifted, head tilted down slope. Jack follows to a gorge, and where brush is scissored, and snow is plowed into a pale berm. The furrow ends in a scatter of black shards that refuse to shine even in thin light. Composite fragments lie embedded like obsidian teeth. Surfaces absorb rather than reflect. Break lines look intentional, as if the material was engineered to fail quietly. No insignia, no tail number. A canopy frame sits twisted and clean. Jack passes a glove over a panel and sees his own reflection vanish in its depthless skin. The craft refuses identity so completely, it feels like an answer. Shadow veers, digs, and clicks nails against a hard contour. Jack sweeps snow with his forearms until a helmet appears, visor frosted, shell the color of beneath it a young man lies half entombed, beard shadowed, skin blue at the edges. Fingers find a carotid pulse faint as moth wings. Breath fogs the visor once. Weak, tradio and radio and guard, and hin again with a stutter, alive. The suit bears no patches, only bonded seams and armored knees. The left leg is mangled from shin to boot, angle wrong enough to jar bile. Jack yanks a foil blanket from his hair. The edges wraps it around his head. His wraps it around the edges. His torso and arms. The edges, the wind. Uck's edges. The wind, the wind, the wind. And the rote shields the head from wind. He steadies himself by speaking in the tone that carried men through fire. You're here, stay with me. The eyelids flutter. A whisper fails, then shapes nothing again. He needs a sled. He saws 2 straight pine poles from storm-pruned brush, lashes crosspieces with rope, pads the bed with his parka liner, and builds a cradle that won't grind bone. Splints go on with narrow rails and fabric bands, ties sit above and below, circulation gets checked by habit. Shadow stations himself windward, scanning the trees, body still as a carved animal at a shrine. They haul in short disciplined pulls. Jack anchors the rope around his waist, leans into the harness and counts steps to keep breath from running away. Shadow scouts along an arc that avoids wind-loaded pillows and thin spots where the face might drop. Twice the dog frees his and the wind. Boot, with the route. The route. The route. The signal. Likes back. Twice Jack changes route without asking. The runners squeal. The ridgeline claws. The sky remains a lid with no hinge. The crest funnels them to a chute crowded with crumb holes. Jack pays rope. Heels breaking, thighs burning, guiding the travois over ripples of crust and through patches of blue ice. Shadow slips under branches, reappears and waits at the next hazard like a marker set by someone who understands consequences. The cabin roof shows at last, a dark stamp pressed into white paper. Inside heat wakes color in dead faces. Jack clears the table, lays the stranger flat, strips away crushed fabric, shields what must stay warm, and positions the ruined leg for support without traction. The stove roars. A space heater adds its noisy devotion. He starts the generator. The radio coughs static. The dish out the wind. The route. The route. Side wears a helmet. The signal of ice that laughs at signal. Tires grind outside. Lena steps in with a med bag and a cloud of breath. She reads the room in one sweep, then moves close with focus that edits fear. Airway clear, Jack answers. Breathing shallow, radial weak, core cold. She warms IV fluid in her hands, slips a line, tape, the sign, the rote, the signal, wheezes, the signal, wheezes, wad wheezes, nay and hex puppa place me, wheezes, name in the spine, and stens for wheeze, palpates spine, tests response. He'll live if we keep him warm and still, she says. We move when the pass opens or a bird risks it. A second engine idles, Rourke enters, hat rim crusted, coat zipped to the sternum, boots griming the plank floor with melted authority. He clocks the suit, the broken buckles, the stack clamps the spine, and wheezes, the spine, and the boy placement, and clamps in the door, the dog's placement, Jack's stance. That doesn't say civilian, he decides. His tone is a ledger line. He runs a thumb across the fabric, frowns at the absence of labels, and turns his attention to the radio like permission could conjure service. A third arrival rattles the windows. Thomas squeezes through carrying a case half his size, knitcap low, cheeks raw, accent scoring consonant. Dish is a snowman, he say placement, and placement, and placement, and the spine and clamps 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 and shadow rises and lets a growl unspool, low and certain, ancient as caves. He plants himself between Thomas and the patient, head level, eyes fixed. Thomas stops, palms open. I only look. The growl continues until Jack jerks his chin at the door. Roof first, he said. Clamps and placement, and Anita cabled the link. Thomas the neck nods and vanishes with cable over his shoulder. Lena improves the splint, pads per clamps and neck, the cable, the neck clamp and neck guard, and guard and guard, and neck oint sets hot packs at neck and groin, and builds a tent of blankets to trap heat. She keeps 2 fingers at the man's neck like a promise. Name? She asks. Jack shakes his head. Nothing on the suit, no papers. She studies the face. 31, give or take. She bends close and speaks with bedside command. You're safe. Breathe with me. Rourke prowls like the past, collecting details even silence can't hide. He notes the engineered fracture lines, the suit's fabric, the cable, the neckway. Jack's tools lash him. The neck or guard, and guard, and guard, and guard.
Hates tools.
He tests his tool guard, and radio and weakly, it hears only blizzard. Authority strains and hardens, a rasp breaks the room, eyelids inch open, forge faces, radio and swims, and swims, and swims, and radio 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 and swims. Lips shape sound and fail, then push again. The voice rides pain and frost, accented yet intelligible. They lied. Breath, not spy-proof. The effort empties him. Eyes close, chest keeps moving. The fragment lands like a live match. Lena checks the drip and murmurs reassurance. Rourke tilts his head as if he could subpoena a whisper. Proof of what? He asks the air. Hungry. Jack files the words where memory will not lose them, and watches the man's hands for Shadow lowers his chin to pause without yielding his line, gaze fixed on Thomas's toolkit like it might crawl on its own. The kid returns trail and faces, and guard, cord and cable, bracket set. I knocked the ice loose, he reports. He reaches toward the radio, then stops when Shadow's growl lifts a notch. He backs a step, slick smile failing. You run it, he offers. Rourke takes the mic. Jack rides the dials. Static thins and fattens, and cord fattens, and fattens, and fattens, and fattens, and fattens, and no voice breaks through. Heat and tension settle into the beams. The wreck offers no story. The suit erases history. The smell of that burn lingers, as verdict fattens, and go. Joe verdict, a verdict, a verdict. Clack moves, because movement steadies thought. Boiling water, warming towels, straightening a bandage, fixing a slipping knot, setting a kettle for tea. No one will drink. He keeps his a verdict, keeps his tone gentle when he talks to Shadow, and the dog believes the message that matters. Order exists. Watch the door, protect the table. Minutes lengthen into a slow hour. Lena records numbers and nods when capillary keeps his capillary synthetic, and refill improves. Rourke steps outside, scans the road, and returns with frost on his collar and the same stubborn caution in his jaw. Thomas hovers by the tool case, fingers itching, mind working angles nobody asked him to work. Jack positions himself where he can see all of them, and gives the stranger a name to anchor the room. Nikolai, he says, memory favoring the syllables the voice formed. Nikolai, you're safe here. Rourke stood with his thumbs on his belt, studying the stranger on Jack's table like a secret begging to speak. That ain't no photographer, that's military. You're harboring a spy, Harlan. His voice had courtroom weight. Jack kept his eyes on Lena's work and the stove's steady glow. Shadow lay between bed and gear, breath slow, eyes bright. Thomas clattered in from the porch. Dishes aligned, he said too fast. Signal good. I swear. He drifted toward the radio. Shadow rose and slid into his path. A gray wall with teeth hidden. The growl that followed was low enough to hum in the boards. Rourke tapped the mic. Static hissed. Aligned to what? He asked. The mount ripped off last winter. Thomas blinked. I built a bracket, he answered. Lashed it with line. In that wind? Rourke said. Lena pressed her wrist to Nikolai's cheek. Temps up. The wound's dirty. He's septic. We need a hospital, but the pass is closed. She wrapped heat at the neck and groin, adjusted the drip and watched breathing that wanted to fail. Jack warmed saline and watched frost paint and erase itself on the window. Memory needled him. On the ridge, Shadow had dug where chemical scent pooled. Under splinters his glove found metal smooth as bone. He had marked the spot and promised a return. The promise is scratched now. He pulled on his coat. 2 minutes, he told Lena. Shadow was already out the door, cutting a track toward the scar. The wreck crouched where wind hit it. Jack scraped with a chisel and found a seam. A case rose from the drift, black, compact, heavy beyond its size. No hinge, no latch, only a glassy circle above a pad with faint glyphs. He loaded it on a sled and hauled it home while Shadow quartered ahead. Heat took his breath as he came inside. Rourke's gaze snapped to the sled. Lena's concern tightened. Thomas leaned like a crow, noticing shine. Jack set the case down. Found near the cockpit, he said. No markings. Rourke crouched and reached. The faceplate pulsed at his shadow with a soft tone. A faint grid glowed, then died. Biometric, he said. Where does it go? Lena asked. Out of sight, Jack said. He pried 2 tongue and groove boards cut loose years ago for nameless emergencies. Lined the joist gap with a folded blanket, lowered the case, reset the boards, and dragged the rug back. Shadow sniffed the seam and lay on it like a seal stamped in wax. Nikolai stirred, a rasp tearing loose. Lena bent close. Easy, she said. You're safe. Breathe slowly. His eyes tracked rafters, then her face. Pain hit. He clawed air. Jack's palms settled his shoulders. Don't fight, he said. Rourke's jaw hardened. When that road opens, I'm calling federal, he muttered. Let them claim their bird. Thomas hovered at the radio. I can boost the signal, he offered. New LMB, fresh cokes, a clean line through the storm window. Shadow slid again, body filling the lane to the gear. The rumble returned like a wire pulled tight. Thomas backed off, hands up. Lena changed the dressing. Heat radiated under reddening skin. Fine threads crept outward. He's septic, she repeated. We need a hospital, but the pass is closed. Jack braced a hand on a chair until the room steadied. Rourke watched first, bowing beyond the glass. If he belongs to somebody dangerous, they're already coming, he said. This cabin isn't invisible. The old lawman looked at Jack with history that wasn't for company. Thomas slipped out, muttering about the bracket. Shadow stared from the threshold until the kid vanished into what. The dog returned to the rug and watched the door. Jack poured tea. Steam softened edges. Lena drank without tasting. Rourke paced. The house breathed like a body fighting fever. Footsteps rattled back. Thomas shoved through, face red, voice pitched. The dish slipped, he said. Wind took the bracket. I need to rehang, or we lose everything. Rourke frowned. You said it was solid. It was. It's the gusts. Shadow rose and locked the room with muscle and intent. The sound he made was not loud. It was final. Rourke stepped close. That mount was never there, he said. You weren't on the roof. You were hunting whatever came down with him. Thomas opened his mouth, closed it. I was trying to help, he said. Too quick by half. Jack cut across the charge. We help by rules, he said. No one touches the patient unless Lena said. Gear stays where I can see it. The dog is right. Nikolai moved his lips. They lied, he whispered. Not spy, proof. The words emptied him. Lena steadied the line and checked pupils. Outside the storm lowered. Snow ticked the glass like ash. Rourke keyed the mic. The universe stayed closed. Jack set the cups aside and let his voice drop into the register that steadied men under fire. If this story of loyalty of a dog who sees what humans miss means something to you, hit subscribe now, because what happens next will break your heart and restore it. Don't miss the moment Shadow saves Jack from himself. Keep listening. The cadence threaded the beams. Rourke resumed pacing. Lena logged vitals and warmed the drip with her palm. Thomas hovered by the door, desperately looking for angles. Shadow guarded the seam as if gravity ran through his spine into earth to pin the secret down. Jack felt the weight below, pulling choices narrow. If the grid matched a hand or an eye, whose would open it? If it opened, what argument spilled out? He pictured a convoy on the pass, a helicopter banking the valley throat, and Frost Ridge waking to sirens. He pictured nothing good for Lena's clinic. Options? He asked. Rourke stopped. Hold your line, he said. Share nothing you don't have to. If they show up, let me do the talking. Lena shook her head. He needs antibiotics. I don't carry, she said. He needs an OR, not blankets. Thomas edged forward. Let me pull the drive from your radio, he said. I can bypass through my rig and get a bounce by compass. He reached toward the stack with 2 fingers like an oath. Shadow rose. The rumble started deep and ended in quiet teeth. Thomas froze, then stepped back. Light thinned. Outside, snow softened to sift. A plow might be carving a trench. Jack knelt by the rug and pressed his palm flat where boards met. The wood was cold and mute. The weight below felt like a sentence hanging over every head. Nikolai slept, skin paper pale, sweat beading at the hairline. Lena swapped hot packs, checked the refill and counted a beat. Hold, she said. Rourke lifted the curtain edge and scanned the road. Thomas studied hinges like a locksmith. Shadow did not blink. Wind shifted. The stovepipe rattled. A drift slumped from the eave with a thud. The clock found rhythm. The minute hand moved toward a future none of them wanted, and all of them would meet. Jack pictured the ridge, the ripped snow, the shards that swallowed light, and the sleeping eye on the hidden case. He had buried it. He had also lit a fuse he could not see. Sirens cut through static on the lone working station. A clipped anchor read, "Unidentified surveillance craft down in Montana. Pilot armed and dangerous." In Frost Ridge, fingers dialed, boots laced, safes opened, Rourke killed his engine, listened a beat, then called names he trusted. By noon, 4 pickups and a plow idled along the curb. Coats snapped, rifles slung low, eyes narrowed against grit. "We keep this lawful," Rourke said. "We check on Harlan, secure the flyer, hold until state, safety on, unless I say." Heads bobbed. 2 handhelds blinked red, but were passed out anyway. Someone muttered, about spies. Someone else muttered, about property. The old lawman set the pace. They climbed the grade in a slow iron snake. Jack heard engines before he saw first hood in his clearing. He set a kettle on the stove, placed a flashlight on the shelf, and slid the back bolt. Shadow stood with paws on the sill, ears forward, tail rigid. A statue wired to thunder. Lena raised her eyes from Nikolai's pallid face, and said nothing. Because no sentence changes what a crowd chooses to believe. Rourke approached first. His rifle sat at low ready, muzzle down, safe engaged. He lifted one hand toward the porch, calling a halt without words. "Jack," he said, tone professional but not friendly. "We need to lay eyes on your guest." Jack filled the doorway without leaving it. "He's barely hanging on," he said. "You bring noise, you bring trouble." Behind him boots shifted, boards creaked, breath smoke. Order frayed before it parted. At the edge, Thomas watched the window, the rug Shadow had guarded, and the seam where boards met. A coil of cable lay over his shoulder like a snake. When no one looked, he drifted toward the generator shed, with an innocent slouch that belonged to chores, not sabotage. Inside, Lena checked the drip, and placed heat at groin and neck. "Pressure is thin," she murmured. "He needs a hospital." Jack heard every word and boxed the fear that wanted to outrun it. "Open up," Rourke said. "Let me manage my people." Jack eased the latch. The door swung a foot. Someone behind Rourke pushed harder, and cold hit the room. 3 men spilled forward on reflex. Shadow surged, chest first, forcing bodies to stop, or stumble. "Back," Jack barked. "No one touches the table," Lena's voice cut like a scalpel. "Step lightly or go home." That held too. It did not fix momentum. Out back, Thomas lifted the generator lid, stripped an inch of wire and bridged terminals. Sparks spat. The engine died. Lights snapped off. Darkness fell. He drew a breath, and screamed into the yard with practiced fear. "He's escaping out back." The phrase was shaped to pull a crowd downhill. Men pivoted. Rourke cursed, and tried to plug a river with 2 hands. The front rank bolted, because new problems feel solvable when your heart is already sprinting. Inside the sudden night, Jack thumbed his lantern. Pale fire showed edges. "Hold your line," he said. Rourke shouted the same from the threshold. Half obeyed, half ran. The porch shook under boots. Shadow returned to the table, and braced his body against a leg like a brace. Lena kept one palm on Nikolai's sternum, and the other on the IV. "Do not jolt him," she said. He'll crash. Those words pinned 3 men and bought seconds. Thomas slid along the siding, found the unlocked back door he had prepped at dawn, and slipped inside. He went straight to the rug. In one motion he flipped it, pried 2 boards with a thin bar, and reached into the joist pocket. Metal kissed his glove. The biometric case, cold and heavy, humming faintly. Shadows spun, launched, and landed between Thomas and the hole. The growl came from a place that remembers winter caves. Thomas froze, then faked left, kicked right, snagged the case by a strap. Jack lunged. Rourke lunged. The kid shouldered through a gap chaos had made. He pinned the case to his chest, and burst for the hallway. Shadow chased. Jack followed with a curse he almost never used. A shout at the window, movement behind the shed, turned the stampede outside again, giving Thomas a lane he hadn't earned. He knifed through, and hit the porch with speed nobody had guessed he owned. The yard boiled breath. Thrown snow. Orders. Thomas cut right, slipped behind the shed, and popped a truck door. A blanket lifted. He shoved the case under the seat, and slammed it. Then he doubled back, and dove for the rear entrance, mouth-shaping panic. He's inside, he yelled. Gun. The word punched discipline in the throat. Men flinched. That pause let him reach the table again. Lena saw intent a beat, before anyone else. No, she said, stepping to block. Thomas hooked a canvas stretcher from behind the wood box, hidden hours earlier, and drove an elbow into her ribs just enough to break stance. I'm helping, he panted. He slid Nikolai onto the canvas with a jerk, and caught the IV line with a lucky hand. Shadow leapt. Jack whistled a single note that meant hold. The dog hovered, quivering, reading a sign older than words. Rourke hit the doorway, rifle low. Stand down, he ordered. Thomas showed a compact pistol, not aiming, only raising the black shape. The front rank recoiled a hair. He used that lever for 3 steps, and yanked the stretcher toward the porch. Snow met canvas. He dragged the weight into the yard, heels cutting trench. Jack reached the threshold, and stopped, because barrel and sight ran through Lena's shoulder. Shadow trembled with bottled motion, waiting for a command that did not come. Thomas hauled for the shed-side truck. He shoved the stretcher across the bench seat, grabbed Lena's wrist, and fixed the pistol along her coat seam like a finger. In, he hissed. Drive. She swallowed, met Jack's eyes and got in because Nikolai's chances rode on fraction. Rourke tracked the cab, then lowered a degree when math said a shot risked the wrong heart. Engines surged, tires found grit and flung slush. The truck fishtailed, corrected and tore for the pass. Shouts scattered after it. Block the curve, call the county, close the diner road. Radios answered with snow. Red taillights dissolved into white, leaving metal on every tongue. Jack exhaled once, and tasted it most. Rourke faced the men he had wound, and now had to unwind. Off the porch, he said, voice flat. Clear the road, pair up, nobody fires without my word. They moved because an order is still a rope. Inside, the lantern shivered. The generator caught. The lights blinked awake. The rug lay crooked. The boards showed fresh pry marks. The room held an outline where trust had been. Jack set the lantern on the table, and laid a palm on Shadow's head. The tremor eased to a hard hum. We go after them, Jack said. Rourke nodded once. We do it smart. Outside, engines turned. Men swung into cabs. The town gathered itself like a fist that hoped to open after the blow. The chase had begun, and the valley knew it. Shadow followed the truck's ruts until the plow line vanished. 2 ragged rails pressed into thawing crust and pooling with gray melt that mirrored a low sky. Jack adjusted his pack, checked sling and bolt, and moved behind the dog along spruce and cut bank. The wind shifted, carrying the sour ghost of exhaust, a coolant tang, and the copper bite of blood. The storm had opened just enough to turn the world treacherous. With the air warming a fraction, the skin of the drifts loosened, and the slope above the road murmured with warning. He read the mountain the way he read a room before a breach. Start zones, cornices, runouts, places that would swallow a man whole if he set one careless foot. Shadow's tail went rigid. They pressed on. They moved fast when cover held, and slower where gullies funneled old snow into new weight. The pass ahead rose like a white shoulder marbled with wind scours and heavy lips. Shadow quartered, nose low, reading a story no human could. Paw to crust, pause, lift, angle, commit. Jack matched the cadence and counted breaths to keep the past caged. 4 in, 4 out, heel to toe, plant, glide. He named firs and rocks softly to stitch the present into a rope he could grip. A raven wheeled once, gave a flat call, and vanished. A flap of canvas snagged on alder told the next chapter. Drag marks slewed away from the ruts. Boot prints overran each other. Tomas's narrow heel, a broader tread smashed by urgency, another scuffed pattern that dragged. A rust-dark smear glazed the crust where someone had stumbled. Jack touched it and rubbed the stain between glove and thumb. Not bright, not pumping, the knowledge eased nothing. A birch wore a fresh dent at bumper height where the truck had kissed bark, then angled toward a logging spur, churned, pitched, and stopped. From there the trail left the road entirely and climbed toward a bowl he did not like. The season had tipped toward thaw and water ran under a crust that pretended to hold. Sun licked through breaks in the cloud and stroked the faces that caught it, cutting load strength like a saw. Jack traced the line a release would take and chose a route that kept trees between his ribs and the mountain's appetite. Shadow approved, slipping into the lane with a glance for confirmation. They skirted a pillow, crept past a convex roll, and shouldered into a shaded pocket where wind lost its teeth and sound carried clean. Voices floated out of the firs, two men, one forcing pace, the other limping, and a third cadence threaded between them, tight with pain. Jack dropped to a knee, set the rifle on a stump, and listened with his eyes. Shadow lay beside him without command. Chest slow, gaze steady, he slid the scope cap aside. Lena stumbled first into view, wrists taped, coat torn, hair iced to her cheek. Tomas hauled the canvas strap at her cuff, pistol jammed into her side. Nikolai limped behind, gray and clenched, one arm cinched to a crude crutch. The sight punched a hole in Jack's chest, and the wind filled it with dust from years he tried not to remember. Kandahar, dusk, an alley of mud walls and hanging wire, a woman with hands up, a gunman breathing through his teeth, dragging her into the sights, betting his life on hesitation. The smell of diesel and bread and rain baked off stone. A boy bleeding through a rag at the corner, a sergeant counting down in his ear. Jack took the shot because there had been no other margin, and the woman folded with the man, her noise braided with the crack, and tied itself to his ribs forever. The alley dimmed. The after-action report used the word collateral. The word still tasted like metal. The present snapped back with a dry pop from the cornice above, a lazy tremor that ran through the bowl. Jack eased deeper into the notch. Fingers straight, crosshairs steady on Tomas's chest. One word moved through his head, and nowhere else. Stop. The trigger had weight, he knew. It also carried a price he had already paid once too often. He drew a breath that tasted like tin. Shadow's ears pinned. The dog looked from Lena to Jack and back, tracking angles the way he tracked weather. Snow hissed. The mountain listened. Jack began the press and never finished it. Shadow lunged, shoulder smashing the barrel. The muzzle tipped skyward. The shot ripped air and vanished into cloud. Echoes ran the ridgeline and dissolved. Tomas spun, fired wild, yanked Lena hard enough to tear a cry loose, then shoved her toward cover. Nikolai dropped to a knee, forced himself up with a grunt, and staggered on. The mountain gave its answer. Snow tore, settled, tore again, and then flowed. The slab broke at the crown and gathered speed, a white river pushed by gravity's full hunger. Jack grabbed Shadow's rough and cut across the fall line towards sparse timber he had marked 3 minutes earlier. He planted hard, drove through crust turning to slush, bit the rifle strap when it swung loose, and moved where the slope offered purchase. Above, Tomas shoved Lena behind a boulder and flung himself flat. Nikolai slammed into the same shelter and vanished under a tide that became foam, then slurry. The noise wasn't thunder. It was grinding bone and sand and ice, a throat clearing to swallow. Branch tips disappeared, reappeared, bent, then stilled. The runout blasted dust into the trees, reached a boot line below and sighed to quiet. Powder hung, then fell. Jack's ears rang. Shadow shook once, ice arcing from his coat, then leaned against Jack's thigh as if to remind him that blood still had weight. Jack spat leather into his palm and tasted guilt. He crawled to the stump again and found Tomas in the glass. The younger man dragged Lena upright, the pistol laid across her ribs, using her as barricade the way cowards do when they worship survival. Jack brought the crosshairs to Tomas's brow and felt his finger find the ghost of pressure. Shadow slid his head under Jack's forearm and lifted the sight off line. A single bark cracked the air, not a warning, a verdict. Jack's breath broke. The scope blurred. He lowered the rifle and folded as if a hand had reached through his spine and wired his lungs shut. Snow soaked his knees. Heat surged, climbed his face, and stung his eyes open. Not again. Not her. He set the rifle down with care, as though it could hear and punish. His fingers closed on fur. Shadow stayed pressed to his ribs, breathing a cadence humans forget. Jack leaned his brow to the dog's neck and matched that meter until the hammering eased by degrees. The bowl held. Cloud machinery crawled. Downrange, Tomas hauled his captive and his limping ally toward a stand of burn, black spires stabbing out of white. Their path crossed a shallow gully where wet snow had pooled. If the light strengthened, that line would turn into another trap with no mercy. Jack measured distance, time, and the human margin with no shot. He wiped his eyes with the back of his glove, pulled the bolt to recenter his focus, and set the safety. He wasn't firing through Lena. He would move, flank, close, and end it with hands, mind, and a partner who knew him better than he did himself. He tapped Shadow's shoulder. The husky looked up and waited. Jack shaped 2 fingers. Stay low. Hook left. Shadow flowed around the stump, body close to ground, feet silent. They ghosted through fur and blowdown, using dips and rocks to erase noise. Jack kept a cross breeze quartering scent away from the gully and glanced upslope whenever the air ticked, reading whether the mountain had opened its mouth again. He spread steps, tested snow with poles, and listened to the silence between distant drips. Below, Tomas's head turned like a fox that knows a larger animal shares the brush. The pistol flashed in a gloved fist. Lena set her jaw and kept her feet under her, refusing to give him a stumble to exploit. Nikolai lurched, gathered, lurched again, while hauling wounded bone. 10 yards more would put a trunk between Lena and any hard angle. 20 would let him reach. Shadow settled at heel, trembling with held power. Jack breathed once more, slow, until the alley loosened its grip and the bull returned. He remembered a flare guttering out, a team pushing because haste felt like courage, and the cost haste had levied. He would not pay that price today. He lifted his hand. Shadow's ears tipped forward. They moved. The abandoned Border Patrol outpost crouched on the ridge, windows punched out, a crooked dish staring at nothing. Jack and Shadow studied the place from spruce shade, counting doors and corners. Tracks led to a side entrance where paint curled. Inside, something scraped metal. Jack eased to the jamb and looked through a broken pane. A lantern hissed on a cabinet, casting a cone across a dusty room. Lena sat tied to a chair, paracord biting wrists and ankles. Nikolai lay on a cot under a mylar sheet, breath shallow, legs swelling against the splint. The IV they'd salvaged was taped to a broom handle. Across the room, Thomas knelt over the black case, a river stone in both hands. He swung. The rock bounced. He swung again. A spider crack flowered across the faceplate, and the case gave a small tone. He snarled, drew a pistol, and fired. The bullet gouged the lid and rang off a locker. Lena flinched but didn't speak, then looked past him toward the door as if she could will Jack through it. Jack slid the latch, bled his breath to nothing, and stepped through Shadow. Shadow flowed with him, low and silent. "Put the rock down," Jack said. Thomas spun with the pistol. Shadow hit his forearm like a thrown door. The pistol flew under a rack of dead radios. Jack caught his wrist on the downswing, twisted, and slammed him against lockers. The rock skittered. Shadow climbed Thomas's chest and planted there, weight heavy, eyes level. The growl wasn't loud, only certain. "You don't understand," Thomas panted. "They're coming. If I open it first, I bargain. All of us walk. You shorted my generator and dragged a dying man into avalanche terrain," Jack said. "That's not strategy, that's panic." Lena's voice cut steady. "Not under the chair rung." Jack kept his gaze on Thomas, reached, found the cord, lifted it free. Skin blanched, then flushed as blood returned. He sliced the line at her ankles. She stood and moved to Nikolai, palm to his cheek, counting to match his ragged rhythm. Jack kicked the rock into a corner and picked up the pistol. He cleared the chamber, dropped the magazine, and threw both into a locker. He lifted the case to the desk, felt the vibration where the bullet had bruised the shell, and saw the crack print a thin star. "Hands high," he told Thomas. Thomas raised both palms and edged sideways until his shoulders pressed dusty flags. "There's a beacon inside," he said. "I cut it." Nikolai's eyelids fluttered. "Inside," he whispered. "Proof." Jack braced the cracked plate under a desk lip, found a pry bar, and levered slow. The case hummed. Lights winked. Then the lid popped with a brittle sigh. A spring leapt. A hinge snapped. Something small flipped from its cradle, skipped off the bar, and dropped into a thin floor seam where wood kissed concrete. "No," Lena breathed. Thomas lunged. Shadow blocked with a shoulder, rolling him back into the chair. Jack went to his knees, probing the crack through dust and splinters. Nothing. Lena found a scraper and slid it down to him. He worked the blade into the seam, nudged, felt a tap against metal, and the object slid deeper with a small tick. He pried at the board with micro-movements. Nails squealed. A screw rolled away. He pressed his cheek to the plank and saw it. A glass square no bigger than a fingernail, etched with gold, resting on the lip of the subfloor. It glinted like a thought about to vanish. "Hold," he said. He kissed the edge with the scraper, lifted a hair. The chip shivered, wobbled, and fell out of sight into the dark below, landing with a soft ping. Silence thinned the walls. Tomas's face brightened with the reckless hope of a man who thinks loss equals opportunity. He bucked under Shadow's weight and reached for the gap. The dog shifted, clamped cloth, not skin, and pinned him again without drawing blood. Jack shoved his fingers into the seam until splinters found knuckle, empty. Lena checked Nikolai's pulse and met Jack's eyes. "He's fading," she said. "We can't stay. The chip is down there." Tomas seized the moment. "We need me," he said. "I know the crawl access. I can pull the board, get it, and trade it before they get here." Jack stood very still. Rage rose. He saw Lena taped to a chair. He saw the alley years ago, the hostage he had failed by obeying the clock. His hand closed on Tomas's collar. His forearm pressed the throat to steel. The room shrank to breath and pressure. He leaned. Tomas's heels lifted. Shadow barked once, a clean sound. It sheared the red fog. Jack stepped back and let Tomas sag. The dog pressed his weight against Jack's shin, anchoring him to a cooler line. Wind whistled through the broken pane. On the ridge, silence changed in a way soldiers feel first. Jack left the case open, knotted a length of paracord into a loop, and lifted a loose board just enough to confirm the crawl ran the length of the room, and that the chip lay beyond arm reach in dust. "We're not dying on our knees under rotten plywood," he said. "We move now." "Truck's in the cut," Tomas blurted. "It'll start. You'll drive," Jack said, "with the dog watching your hands." Lena tightened the IV, swapped the Mylar for a blanket that would travel, and slid heat packs into Nikolai's armpits. "Breath's 9, she said. "We're almost out of time." They staged the exit with small motions. Jack slid the paracord through chair legs and tied Tomas's wrists in front so he could steer and nothing else. Shadow sat where he could touch a forearm with one step. Jack slung the rifle and grabbed the lantern. He left the radio on and the door ajar so any newcomer would hear presence and see chaos. Cold met them like a blade. The yard lay hushed. Drift edges had refrozen slick. Downslope, the cut showed the truck hood dusted white, nose against a stump. They moved. Jack first, Lena and Nikolai in the middle, Tomas in front of Shadow with a new respect for teeth that had not yet chosen to show. At the truck, Jack opened the passenger door. He and Lena loaded Nikolai, strapped him, and tied the IV to the visor. Shadow climbed into the rear footwell and planted there, eyes on Tomas's wrists. Jack took the driver's seat. Tomas fumbled keys, then offered them. The engine caught, coughed, and settled. Jack set the truck in low. Ice crackled. Branches whispered along the doors. He kept the nose straight and the speed steady. Behind them the outpost shrank to a dark mouth. Lena watched Nikolai's chest. "8 a minute," she said. "We have to reach the clinic." "If the pass is blocked?" Tomas asked. "Then we cut a way through," Jack said. He felt Shadow's head lean into his thigh and the absence of a fingernail-sized truth under the floor they were leaving. The road unfurled toward the last chances left to them now. Snow thinned to a grainy veil by noon, revealing the cut like a pale scar. Jack eased the truck through the last drift and slid into Frost Ridge while the clinic's generator hammered a stubborn beat. Lena shouted for help. 3 ranchers lifted Nikolai from the seat to a gurney improvised from a door and webbing. Volunteers cleared counters, warmed blankets, and opened a path between stacked crates. A wasp sound rose beyond the pass, swelled until windows quivered, and became a lime-green Border Patrol helicopter dipping into the lot. Medics ran low, heads tucked, cases clipped to harness, moving with choreography born of repetition and weather. Rourke met them at the door, posture settling back into authority as if the town had been waiting to remember how orders feel when they fit. Shadow trotted under the gurney as if he had a badge. Straps tightened. Rotor wash lifted grit and a prayer Lena pretended not to say. Nikolai blinked through fog, found her face, and shaped 3 rough words. "Tell them everything." The medic touched a sleeve. "Save your air." The cabin sealed, and the bird slid toward the pass, dwindling to a dark insect over the white throat. The lot's ordinary sounds returned in a spill. Diesel, boot soles, the heater's cough. A county deputy arrived, read Lena's statement, glanced at Rourke's notes, and turned Tomas toward the wall. Cold cuffs clicked. "Assault, reckless endangerment, interference with medical care," the deputy said. Tomas stared at floor tiles that suddenly seemed to prefer truth. No one answered him. The dog watched without blinking. Agents began the slow machinery of order. One logged statements with a pencil as patient as winter. Another photographed Shadow, the broken splints, and the burned suit fabric as if he had learned long ago that small facts outlive speeches. Jack said little until the scar-eyed medic asked about the rib. "Black composite," Jack answered. "No marks. There was a case inside the drift. It cracked. A chip fell through the floor at an old Border Patrol outpost." Protocol wrestled necessity in the medic's face and lost by an inch. "Show me," he said. Rourke grabbed his coat. Lena squeezed Jack's arm once. "Go," she said. "I'll keep the clinic steady." They drove in a short convoy, a Border Patrol SUV, Rourke's truck and Jack's pickup with Shadow riding alert in the passenger seat. Afternoon light sharpened the edges along Devil's Crown. The outpost hunched on the ridge with windows punched and a tired door yawing on a sprung hinge. Inside, dust spun where a lantern had hissed. The case waited on the desk, its face star-cracked. A narrow seam in the floor gleamed like a secret refusing to be forgotten. Jack lay prone with a headlamp and eased a scraper into the seam while an agent steadied a board. In the joist pocket, half sunk in grit, lay a square no bigger than a fingernail, etched with gold tracks as fine as frost. Tape on steel kissed the edge. The chip lifted by degrees, until it lay on the scraper like a moth not yet willing to fly. The agent produced an anti-static sleeve, slid the chip inside, sealed with tamper tape and wrote time and place in a logbook line that steadied everyone's breathing. He hesitated, then uncased a hardened laptop and an offline reader. "Preview only," he said. Nothing touches a network. The tool chewed noise into folders: Air Aqua, BV trials, exposure curves, ranch sample map, personnel internal, security ops. Jack opened personnel. A photo of a younger Nikolai appeared beside a company badge. Title: Senior Process Engineer, Aerosolized Vector Group. Clearance: R5. Supervisor Dr. Karine Solis. A note read, "Approved for night aircraft trials." Jack clicked security. A memo titled "Recovery Events Substituted Colleagues," where any public agency would write officers. Uniform guidelines matched the figures who had hunted the ridge. A checklist for asset retrieval assumed no law would be notified until narrative demanded an after-action gloss. Jack opened trial data. Graphs mapped aerosol plumes over pens and creek bends. Metadata pinned coordinates to Black Hollow Valley and the basin next door. Logs listed wind speed, humidity, drift. Sample tables cross-referenced troughs, irrigation gates, sinks, school fount. Positive markers dotted columns like winter constellations. A subfolder tagged Incident 14 showed dead sheep stacked by a fence, and a terse email from Nikolai to Solis. Vector crosses species and groundwater. Halt flights pending ethics review. The reply, short enough to bruise, read, "Proceed, control messaging, legal will prepare indemnities." Jack felt the seat under him harden from vinyl to stone. He scrolled to images of aerosol rigs bolted into a black airframe that looked too familiar under snow. The SUV acquired a hush with edges. Veterans hear wrongness gather the way they read storm light on cornices. Jack opened ranch sample map. Blue pins speckled Frost Ridge, and climbed toward the last mailbox on the grade. One pin sat over his creek. He saw Shadow drinking, the iron tang he had filed under winter plumbing, headaches he had dismissed as weather. He opened exposure curves. A red line jumped past safety into a realm where breath and bone pay later. He closed his eyes against a tide he knew too well. Choices arriving as tasks, tasks arriving as debts, debts arriving as ghosts. When he looked again, the screen had not learned shame. It waited for adults to act. The agent exhaled a word that would never appear in a report. "We need warrants and a federal lab outside donor reach," he said. 2 sealed copies, 1 out of state. Rourke leaned to the door. "Give me something I can tell people who still trust doors to hold." Jack kept it shut. Aurelia Labs' local biotech giant ran airborne pathogen tests over livestock and water. Nikolai tried to stop it. The men on the ridge were corporate security chasing their own engineer. Rourke's breath steadied, the way hills settle after a slide finds bottom. "We lock the site," he said. "We hold ground until the real badges arrive." They sealed the sleeve, photographed the room, and drove back heavier than they had left. At the clinic, Lena had arranged gauze, fuel charts, and a pot labeled for the stubborn that steamed on a crate. He reached Cullaspell, she said. Vitals thin but present. Jack drank, nodded and stepped into a quiet exam room with a pen, brown envelope and dog-eared atlas. He wrote in a block hand that once drew grids on dusty maps, description of the crash, the suit without marks, the hidden case, the chip, the folders, the pins on taps and troughs. He copied 3 miles, a timestamp and coordinate. Then he printed one sentence that refused poetry and demanded daylight. "Check the water in Black Hollow Valley, they are poisoning you." He folded the pages, added a prepaid number linked to a dead mailbox, and printed a recipient that still means daylight when it is earned. New York Times Investigations Desk. He sealed the packet, taped the seams and found Rourke on the stoop. "Ride, Jack." They drove to the next town where the post office kept late winter hours and a clerk wearing gloves weighed the envelope, printed a certified label, and slid the packet into a bin with a soft sound like a lever thrown. Jack stood a second longer than necessary and stepped back into air that tasted almost clean. Convoy engines grumbled along Devil's Crown gathering wreck pieces. Notices went up along a barricade asking neighbors to keep off the cordoned slope. Frost Ridge settled into a wary quiet, the kind that follows blows which have not learned their names. Jack parked by the cabin. The clock ticked. The stove murmured. Shadow rested his head on Jack's knee, and watched his face, the way a partner watches a man come back from a place with no map. Night came cold and sharp. Stars returned like stubborn facts, insisting on themselves no matter who tries to bury them. Jack laid a split on coals, listened to wind move between fur and roof, and waited for the phone that would test whether truth could still make a sound. Back at the cabin, Shadow slept light, ears twitching, as wind traced secrets along the roofline all night.
Fire crackles low, a quiet rhythm under the last breath of wind, as night steadies around the cabin.
The piano on the old radio barely rises above the embers' whisper, a soft melody keeping time with the stove's gentle throat. Shadow rests his head on Jack's knee. Warm weight, slow breath, eyes reflecting the orange glow like two small moons holding steady in a sky that finally remembers how to be still. Jack rubs the husky's ear with a scarred thumb, not to soothe the dog so much as to remind himself that the world can answer a hand with something gentler than recoil. The room smells of pine pitch, wool and snow steaming off boots by the door. The clock on the wall ticks without malice. Outside, Black Hollow Valley exhales, and the ridge answers like a tired giant settling its shoulders. He came to Montana to escape war. He thought distance would turn memories into harmless shapes, that a ridge in a long winter could freeze the sounds, sand down the edges, quiet the ghosts, and make time behave again. But the valley taught different lessons. Silence grows teeth when fear feeds it. The past walks, trades uniforms, and waits by the door with new questions, dressed as old mistakes. Solitude can heal, it can also lie. Healing needs witness, and witness demands the steadiness to keep looking even when the picture hurts. Shadow showed him the rest. The dog never argued, never explained, never offered reasons. He simply stood where truth stood, watched doors that others insisted were walls, and found seams in snow where lies tried to hide. When panic tried to drown breath with old dust and radio ghosts, that cool head pressed against Jack's thigh and rewrote the air until lungs remembered their job. When rage tightened his hand around another throat, a single bark lifted the arm and opened a way back to mercy. The dog's courage wasn't noise or teeth, it was placement, exact, immovable, right? Some battles aren't fought with rifles, they are fought with steadiness. They are fought by choosing to wait 1 second longer, by keeping both eyes open when heart and memory beg for the dark, by asking what helps rather than what hurts, by writing a note that says check the water and signing it with no name at all, knowing the blowback will know where to look anyway. They are fought on porches where a town that almost broke itself decides it will not break tonight. They are fought in clinics where a nurse warms fluids with her hands and refuses to let breath fail. They are fought on cold floors under dead radios where a man picks at a seam until a sliver of truth finally sees light. Some are fought with truth, not the kind traded like a coin in loud rooms, but the kind that keeps walking when doors shut. Truth that shows up in labs under light that can't be bought. Truth that survives redactions, committees, and donors with soft smiles. Truth that crawls back into day because one engineer chose conscience over payroll, one old lawman remembered duty before pride, and one dog refused to move from a spot on the floor until help arrived. Truth rarely shouts, it persists. Jack looks at Shadow and sees not a rescue, but a mirror. The dog met him where rage lived and set a different pace, nose to wind, feet sure, eyes patient. The soldier learned to follow. Tonight he listens to the piano and lets the notes draw lines through a map that used to be all borders and no bridges. He cradles a chipped mug with both hands and feels warmth answer scars that cold could never touch. Breath settles into a rhythm that belongs to here, not to then. The room gets larger rather than louder. He came to Montana to escape war. The valley gave him a fight that did not ask him to shoot. It asked him to witness, to choose, to step between harm and the helpless without becoming harm himself. It asked him to trust again. First a dog, then a friend, then a town, then strangers with badges who listened instead of posturing. It asked him to set down something heavier than steel so his hands could carry what mattered: evidence, names, promises kept, and the bravest soldier is the one who lays down the gun. Not because the world turns safe, but because he understands a loaded mind can ruin a day faster than any weapon. He keeps skill, keeps respect, keeps care, and puts rage on a high shelf where it cannot reach the trigger. He takes up older tools, a rope, a pen, a phone, a neighbor's name, a promise spoken without heat. He learns to hold a door, hold a gaze, hold himself to account, and let go when grudges beg to live rent-free. He learns that strength is often the quietest thing in the room. Shadow shifts, sighs, and closes his eyes. Jack sets the mug down and scratches the place between ear and collar where gratitude gathers. He thinks of Lena at the clinic, stubborn as the stove, counting breaths that grew strong by inches. He thinks of Rourke on Main Street, rewriting a report until it tells the truth rather than the version that fits an easy headline. He thinks of Tomas behind bars, young enough that a lesson might still become a life. He thinks of a pilot lifted from a frozen strip by a bird that threaded a pass, a data chip sealed in a bag, a package sliding across a postal counter toward a desk that still believes daylight matters. Wind fades, the fire lowers to patient coals. The piano quiets to a single phrase that lingers like sparks when a log settles and gives up its last breath. Jack speaks without ceremony, voice meant for one pair of steady ears and for anyone else who might need it. A life can be rebuilt with small honest acts. A town can forgive if truth arrives before excuses. A person can make amends not by erasing what he did, but by standing guard so others never need to choose that same ruin. Some nights call for noise. This one asks for keeping. If this story reached you, if the dog on this floor reminds you of one you miss, or the soldier by this stove reminds you of someone who came back carrying more than a duffel, stay with us. Tell us where you're listening from. Share the moment that caught your breath. Name the companion who kept you whole when you would have split apart. Tap subscribe so the next chapter finds you when the night runs long. Ring the bell so you don't miss the minute a small act turns a tide. Your listening keeps these fires alive. Your comments map where this story travels, and your voice helps the next truth fight its way to light. And if you know a place where silence has grown teeth, if you've seen water turn strange, if a factory light burns at hours that make no sense, if a drone crosses land that never asked for that shadow, tell someone who won't sell your name. Write it down, carry it up the hill, slide it across a counter to a clerk who will stamp it and send it beyond the reach of local favors. Truth needs carriers more than champions. Tonight, that can be you. Jack leans back. Shadow stays close as always. The stove ticks. The clock moves its hands without hurry or guilt. The ridge settles. Stars take their places one by one over Black Hollow Valley. Stubborn, ordinary, beautiful. We'll meet again on this frequency. New wind, new trails, new choices that test and redeem. Until then, keep a light on the porch, a blanket by the door, and a little faith in the dog who knows the way before you do. He came to Montana to escape war, but Shadow showed him something better. Some battles aren't fought with rifles, some are fought with truth, and winning means learning when to lay the weapon down and walk forward together.